Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. I'm the co-author of Patriots History of the United States, Larry Swikart, with Michael Allen. I'm also your host for this whole series. We're reading through the entire Patriots History of the United States, including all of the reference documents, which is what we're going to do today. We ended up with the Dred Scott decision, and today I'm going to read you the legal case Scott v. Sanford, 1857. Now, let me introduce this by saying there is a very good new book that I referenced in my last lesson. It came out, or I was made aware of it, after our last edition. So its material is included in the 20th anniversary edition that we are going to be making available as a free offer if you sign up for either the Wild World of History VIP or the Wild World of Politics Insider. You would get that 20th anniversary edition in PDF form free. So consider doing that. Folks, I can't tell you how much stuff is in each of these programs. It's just, look, if you don't want to do my curriculum, but you would like to kind of have a taste of American history, the VIP subscription includes 6 of my video lessons from my curriculum: the American Revolution, the Constitution, Age of Jackson, Civil War, World War II, and Reagan. It also includes, the VIP does, about 50 or 60 hours worth of videos, some 40 of them from my Wild Wednesday webcasts on different historical topics of every type: Charge of the Winged Hussars, Prohibition, Hitler, Napoleon, the atomic bomb, what did people wear in colonial times? I mean, there's almost 50 of these videos, each one about 45 minutes. Then you've got 6 ongoing lesson series where I keep adding when new material comes up, such as Reagan, the American president, Churchill, integrity, let's see, the horrible history of Howard Zinn, enduring lessons on life and citizenship. This one's really good for kids, folks. You gotta buy the package just for that series, because I deal with such things as time and money. What's the connection between time and money? Capitalism and socialism. I guarantee you, even if you've taken university courses, you probably never heard capitalism and socialism depicted and contravened, challenged in this way in terms of how they're presented, i.e., socialism is fundamentally selfish. Capitalism is fundamentally unselfish. So just a few things. Consider it's only $6 a month. If you want to pay for the year, it's only $69 for the year. It's a true great value. And if you refer someone else and they send me a letter, an email at larry@wildworldhistory.com and say, so-and-so referred me, I will give you free the 20th anniversary edition. Just remind me, say, hey, Larry, I referred Joe, and where's my 20th anniversary edition? I'll send that to you. All right, well, let's get started. Today, we're going to read through the Dred Scott decision. This is from Patriots History Reader. And there's a great little book. I mentioned this, the David Hardy book on Dred Scott. So you want to look up David Hardy, Dred Scott. I can't remember the full title. Hang on, I'll find it for you. Okay, it's David Hardy, Dred Scott, The Inside Story. It's a very little book. I don't know who the publisher was, but the guy did a really good job of analyzing stuff I had never seen before. And I've read a lot about Dred Scott, but this was new stuff, so check it out. All right, let's get going. Scott v. Sanford. Now, this was misspelled in the original court document. S-A-N-D-F-O-R-D. The correct name is S-A-N-F-O-R-D, like Sanford and Sons. Okay. The Dred Scott was argued in the Supreme Court of the United States in the December term of 1856. Scott was a slave born in Virginia who was later sold to an Army officer in Missouri. Scott traveled with his owner to live in Illinois and Minnesota before returning to Missouri. After his owner died, Scott sued to be declared free since he had resided for many years in Illinois, a free state, and Minnesota, at the time a free territory. He was even allowed to marry while in Minnesota, an indication that he possessed a right to enter into a legal contract, something slaves were forbidden to do. After winding its way through the Missouri state courts, which simultaneously ruled that as a slave, Scott could not sue, yet could appeal, and by the way, this was not true because Missouri state law allowed freedom suits. It said that a slave could sue on grounds that they had been wrongfully imprisoned. This is mainly for free blacks who were taken. But because the distinction didn't exist, any slave who could get a lawyer, which of course is pretty tough, could enter a suit. In the federal system, the case reached the U.S. Supreme Court, where Scott lost. Although the opinion of the Chief Justice, in this case Roger B. Taney, is generally held as the ruling from the majority, all 7 concurring justices wrote opinions, as well as the 2 dissenting justices. Taney held that no slave or descendant of a slave could be a citizen of the United States, so Scott possessed no right to sue in federal court. The court also upheld the principle that slavery was a state issue and that Congress possessed no authority to prohibit slavery in the territories. On those grounds, which, by the way, don't you think that's odd? Supreme Court is a federal institution. So if it ruled it's a state issue, then the federal court should have no legal authority. I don't know. It's kind of, let's see. Okay. Court also upheld the principle that slavery is a state issue and that Congress possessed no authority to prohibit slavery in the territories. On those grounds, both the Missouri Compromise 1820 and the Compromise of 1850 were unconstitutional. Moreover, the people, inferring the current doctrine of popular sovereignty, could not prohibit slavery either. Only a state, one that had slavery as a default position already in place in its constitution, could amend its state constitution to prohibit slavery. The court effectively turned back the clock, as ex-slaves had held full voting rights in several northern states since before the Constitution was written. Ramifications were widespread, from greatly invigorating the Republican Party to helping cause the financial panic of 1857. I went over that at length last time from an article that apparently is the rule of thumb now. It's really the accepted article on the Panic of 1857 and what it was all about. And you'll remember it was about the Supreme Court basically turned all the territories into bleeding Kansas, which caused the East-West Railroad bonds to crash, which brought down the New York banks. So really, the Dred Scott decision was responsible for the Panic of 1857. Abraham Lincoln, running in the 1858 Illinois Senate race against Stephen Douglas, forced Douglas to repudiate the decision, thereby costing him the South and the presidency in 1860. The case's greatest impact was in hastening the Civil War, as it seemed to impose Southern doctrine on Northern states. The South may have won in court, but the next decision was to be decided on the battlefield. The reader could examine Taney's overreaching in his opinion, now generally considered the worst Supreme Court decision in American history, and how such actions taken from a position of power frequently bring about a result opposite to the one desired. It's possible Lincoln would have lost to Douglas in 1860 if Dred Scott had been freed by the court and ex-slaves declared acceptable as U.S. citizens. The reader should speculate on the course the United States might have taken had Lincoln not been elected, and when the end of slavery would have come, and through what mechanism. Would America's exceptionalism have become a joke? Would the United States have survived? Was there any chance of peaceably resolving the slavery issue? What does the court's unwillingness to consider previous decisions that had tended toward abolitionism and racial equality say about judicial activism? Okay, so here we go. Dred Scott, plaintiff in error v. John F.A. Sandford. Chief Justice Taney delivered the opinion of the court on March 6, 1857. The question is simply this: can a Negro whose ancestors were imported into this country and sold as slaves become a member of the political community formed and brought into existence by the Constitution of the United States, and as such become entitled to all the rights and privileges and immunities guaranteed by that instrument to the citizen. One of which rights is the privilege of suing in a court of the United States in cases specified in the Constitution. It will be observed that the plea applies to that class of persons only whose ancestors were Negroes of the African race and imported into this country and sold and held as slaves. The only matter, in other words, he's trying to rule out Indians and any extracurricular challenges. The only matter in this issue before the court, therefore, is whether the descendants of such slaves, when they shall be emancipated, or who are born of parents who had become free before their birth, are citizens of a state in the sense in which the word citizen is used in the Constitution of the United States. And this being the only matter in dispute on the pleadings, the court must be understood as speaking in this opinion that the class only, that is, of those persons who are descendants of Africans who are imported into this country and sold as slaves. So what he's saying is that, well, if somehow you were a free black, say, living in England, and you came into America, you could become a citizen. But anybody who has ever been brought in as a slave can't ever be a citizen. Once a slave, always a slave. In discussing this question, we must not confound the rights of citizenship, which a state may confer within its own limits, and the rights of citizenship as a member of the Union. It does not by any means follow, because he has all the rights and privileges of a citizen of a state, that he must be a citizen of the United States. He may have all the rights and privileges of a citizen of a state, and yet not be entitled to the rights and privileges of a citizen of any other state. So, let's say that you're a slave who has been freed in Kentucky, and or better yet, let's say Kentucky, and let's say that you go to New York, and in New York you have the privileges of voting in a New York state election. Okay, and let's say you stay long enough to become a citizen of the state of New York. So you are a full citizen in New York, but once you cross the border into, say, Pennsylvania, you no longer maintain those rights. Now, Pennsylvania may allow you those rights, but it's a state-by-state basis. In other words, just being a citizen of New York does not make you a citizen of the United States as a whole. Okay, that's what he's saying. Is it true every person and every class and description of persons who were at the time of the adoption of the Constitution recognized as citizens in the several states became also citizens of this new political body? But none other. It was formed by them and for them and their posterity, but for no one else. So he's saying that citizenship of everybody who was here at the time of the Constitution, well, that's okay. If you were a free person at that time, you're all free and you're all citizens, but not since, not anybody else. And the personal rights and privileges guaranteed to citizens of this new sovereignty were intended to embrace those only who were the members of the several state communities, or who should afterwards by birthright or otherwise become members according to the provisions of the Constitution and the principles on which it was founded. It was the union of those who were at the time members of the distinct and separate political communities into one family, whose power for certain specified purposes was to extend over the whole territory of the United States. In other words, he's adopting the compact view of the Constitution that says that Constitution was created by a gentleman's agreement, right? A compact, and that anybody can withdraw from that compact at any time they want, which is totally opposite of what Jefferson said in the Declaration, and it's totally opposite of what Lincoln would say, which is the body theory, which is that the United States as a nation is one body, and you can no more separate out a state than you can cut off your arm. The bleeding would kill the body. It was the union of those who were at the time members of distinct and separate political communities into one political family whose power for certain specified purposes was to extend over the whole territory of the United States, and it gave to each citizen rights and privileges outside of his state which he did not before possess, and placed him in other state upon perfect equality with its own citizens as to rights of person, rights of property. It made him a citizen of the United States. So now he's saying the Constitution did make you a citizen of the United States. That's pretty interesting. It becomes necessary, therefore, to determine who were citizens of the several states when the Constitution was adopted. And in order to do this, we must recur to the governments and the institutions of 13 colonies when they separated from Great Britain, formed the new sovereignties, and took their places in the family of independent nations. No, South Carolina was not an independent nation. Rhode Island was not an independent nation. No court had ever held that before. We must inquire who at the time were recognized as the people as citizens of a state whose rights and liberties had been outraged by the English government, who declared their independence and assumed the powers of government to defend their rights by force of arms. In the opinion of the court, the legislation, histories of the times, and the language in the Declaration of Independence show that neither the class of persons who had been imported as slaves, nor their descendants, whether they had become free or not, were then acknowledged to be a part of the people, nor intended to be included in the general words used in that memorable instrument. Well, that's true. Constitution does not mention slavery or slaves. It talks about people. People who were in servitude, people who were obliged to do service, right? But the first principle is they were people. And so people, if free, must become citizens. I mean, if they wish to, right? I mean, it's you can't jimmy that the way you want to. Tanya is really being horrible with the law here and logic. It is difficult at this day to realize the state of public opinion in relation to the unfortunate race which prevailed in the civilized and enlightened portions of the world at the time of the Declaration of Independence and when the Constitution of the United States was formed and adopted. But the public history of every European nation displays it in a manner too plain to be mistaken. Well, Raj, we ain't a European nation. We are exceptional, and our exceptional principles specifically separated us from all the European nations except England, and we only had one thing in common with England, and that was common law. We didn't share the Christian Protestant religious tradition. I guess we shared property rights with written titles and deeds, but we did not share the religious tradition, a bottom-up religion. And certainly with all the nations of Europe, they were top down in terms of divine right. The English were top down until 1688. They, the Europeans, had far more than a century before had been regarded as beings of an inferior order. So, well, because the Europeans think that blacks are inferior, we should. And altogether unfit to associate with the white race, either in social or political relations, so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit. Give me a break. If slavery is for somebody's benefit, then all whites should have been enslaved. He, the Negro, is bought and sold and treated as an ordinary article of merchandise and traffic, wherever a profit could be made by it. This opinion was at the time fixed and universal in the civilized portion of the white race. It was regarded as an axiom in morals as well as politics, which no one thought of disputing or supposed to be open to dispute. That's, of course, wrong. William Wilberforce had already argued this at length in England, which had abolished slavery in its entire territories by this point. So if you're going to, in fact, I think France had too. So if you're going to argue about, well, the Europeans do it, Europeans had already freed their slaves. And men in every grade and position in society daily and habitually acted upon it in their private pursuits, as well as in matters of public concern, without doubting for a moment the correctness of this opinion. The language of the Declaration of Independence is equally conclusive. It begins by declaring that when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve, no, not states, to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitles them. The Constitution says they were persons. They are therefore entitled to be treated as persons, not property. A decent respect for the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them in separation. It then proceeds to say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, persons, are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among them is the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and to secure these rights, governments are instituted deriving their just powers from the consent of the government. You note that every place he's appealing to, it's talking about people, persons. There is no mention of property or of slaves being property of a separate class of humans. The general words above quoted would seem to embrace the whole human family. Yes, they do. And if they were used in familiar instrument at this day, it would be so understood. But it's too clear for dispute that the enslaved African race were not intended to be included. No, it's not. It's just the opposite. They said just the opposite. And formed no part of the people who formed and adopted the Declaration. Well, there were free blacks at the time of the Constitution and of the Declaration. Not a lot, but there were. I'm not going woke. There's no nonsense that all the founders were black or some goofball garbage like that. But there were free blacks at the time of the Revolution and at the time of the Constitution. They formed no part of the people who framed and adopted this declaration, for if the language as understood in that day would embrace them, the conduct of the distinguished men who framed the Declaration of Independence would have been utterly and flagrantly inconsistent with the principles they asserted, and instead of the sympathy of mankind to which they confidently appealed, they would have deserved and received universal rebuke and reprobation. No, no, no. At the time of the Constitution, let alone the Declaration, no nation on earth had abolished slavery. So no nation was going to look down on the United States and say, well, you have servitude in your Constitution. Nope, not slavery. Persons in service. So Taney is really stretching here. This is chud pickle kind of logic. Yet the men who framed this declaration were great men, high in literary acquirements, high in their sense of honor, and capable of asserting principles inconsistent with those in which they were acting. They perfectly understood the meaning of the language they used and how it would be understood by others, and they knew it would not, in any part of the civilized world, be supposed to embrace the Negro race, which by common consent had been excluded from civilized governments and the family of nations and doomed slavery. So right there, he admits that, oh, well, all the Europeans had adopted slavery. So above, he's trying to say that we need to look at the Europeans and what they're doing, who had by that time abolished slavery. And the next paragraph, he says, we need to look at the Europeans and what they're doing, because at the time they embraced slavery. Which is it, Raj? They spoke and acted according to the established, well, this is really long. I may have to break this into two parts. This one's really long. The established doctrines and principles, and in the ordinary language of the day, and no one understood them. The unhappy black race were separated from the white by indelible marks and laws long before established and were never thought of or spoken of except as property. That's simply wrong. In Rome, blacks were not necessarily property. In various places in Europe, blacks were not simply property. There were black troops fighting with Napoleon. Okay, that was 40 years before this was issued. As I said, all the Europeans, I don't know if Spain had, I have to look at Spain's independence declaration, but France and England had gotten rid of slavery by the time this was written in all their empire. Hang on, I'm going to find that out. Hold on. Okay, so I was correct. Spain did not abolish slavery in its colonies until 1873, or 8 years really after we did. If you want to go with the Emancipation Proclamation, 10 years after. Okay, let's pick back up. The state of public opinion had undergone no change when the Constitution was adopted and is equally evident from its provisions and language. Simply untrue. Over half the country by that time disapproved of slavery, well over half. That's why the South was turning cartwheels and doing pretzels to try and justify slavery, because the majority of Americans, even though they weren't abolitionists who wanted instant end of slavery, they did not like slavery and they wanted to see it ended. They weren't yet ready to fight a war about it, but they wanted it ended. So he's wrong again. So he's appealed to European history, wrong. He has appealed to public opinion, wrong. He has appealed to the Declaration and the Constitution, wrongly. How do you get wronger? The brief preamble sets forth by whom it was formed, for what purpose, and for whose benefit and protection. It declares it is formed by the people of the United States, 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 not the states. I know there's some of you states' rights types out there that the South shall rise again. And it was not formed by the states. The United States in the Declaration of Independence says it was formed by the people. The Constitution begins with "we the people," not "we the states." They did not believe in a compact theory. They believed in a body theory, a holistic theory. That's why they got rid of the articles. It was a compact document. And brief preamble sets forth by whom it was formed, what person, what benefit and protection, and declares that it was formed by the people of the United States, which would mean, I hate to harp on this, but this would mean free blacks who were people. Oh, it would also mean slaves, who according to the Constitution were persons or people. Do me a favor, go through the Constitution, and wherever you see that phrase, unfree persons, I want you to draw a line through it and write above it people, unfree people. That'll help you really understand this a lot, or people in servitude. Because when you start understanding the Constitution talks about people or persons, not property, the whole argument itself goes right out the window. Yes, an indentured servant can sell himself into a form of slavery for a certain amount of time, but he's still a person and could marry and could sue in court. All right, let's keep going. That is to say, by those who are members of the different political communities of several states. No, it doesn't. Jefferson did not say that the people who founded this country did so as citizens of different states. He just said the people. You can't say that, as Tawny does, that they knew what they were talking about. They knew what they were saying, and then turn around and say, well, and turn around and add words to it. Say, well, this is what he really meant. No, he said what he meant, and he meant what he said. Isn't that a Dr. Seuss? I saw that in Bugs Bunny, I guess. I meant what I said, and I said what I meant. An elephant's faithful 100%. Right? Isn't that something from the cartoons? Anyway, okay. And its great object declared to be secure, the blessings of liberty to themselves and their posterity. It speaks in general terms of people of the United States and of citizens of the several states. But unfortunately, citizens must be people. When it's providing for the exercise of the powers granted, the privileges secured to the citizen, it does not define what description of persons are intended to be included in these terms. He admits it. Or who shall be regarded as a citizen and one of the people. Well, New York and several other northern states granted citizenship rights to blacks. It uses them as terms so well understood, no further description or definition is necessary. He dodges this precisely because further definition is necessary. And if you looked at northern states who granted citizenship to blacks, you would see that, gee whiz, they are people and citizens. But there are two classes in the Constitution which point directly and specifically to the Negro race as a separate class of people. The word Negro is not mentioned in the Constitution. So BS, Raj, and show easily that they were not regarded as a portion of the people or citizens of the government then formed. One of these clauses reserves to each of the 13 states the right to import slaves, but you could import white slaves too, Raj. And in fact, most of the early slaves to the North American continent and the Caribbean were whites. They were indentured servants who were treated as slaves, and they were Irishmen. If it thinks proper, and the importation which it thus sanctions was unquestionably persons of the race which we are speaking. No, it was not. No, it was not. It was later switched to that for convenience. But white indentures vastly outnumbered blacks up until about 1650, 1670, something like that. And the other provision, the states pledge themselves to each other to maintain the right of property of the master by delivering up to him any state who may have escaped from his service and been found within their respective territories. But they don't honor it as a right of person. They don't say we're returning a person to the status of slavery. What they meant was, and what they said was, we are returning this person who is in servitude according to the law. Person who is. You can't get away from that word. By the first above mentioned clause, therefore, the right to purchase and hold this property is directly sanctioned and authorized for 20 years by people who framed the Constitution. No, it's not. States permitted slavery, but the Constitution referred to slaves as persons. So you're going to have a conflict. And by the second, they pledge themselves to maintain and uphold the right of the master, the manner specified. Well, this was true of indentured servants. They upheld the right of people to capture and return indentured servants because of their servitude, not because of what kind of people they were. As long as the government they formed should endure, and these two provisions show conclusively that neither the description of persons therein referred to nor the descendants were embraced in any other provision of the Constitution. For certainly these two clauses were not intended to confer on them their posterity the blessings of liberty or any of the personal rights so carefully provided for the citizen. BS. And it's proven by the fact that New York and other states granted citizenship. And is incapacitated from holding particular offices. Well, so are women. Women and minors who form part of the political family cannot vote, and when a property qualification is required to vote or hold a particular office, those who have not the necessary qualification cannot vote or hold office, yet they are citizens. Yes, but they are also people. Note what they all have in common. They're all people. Women were not considered property. I know many think they were treated as such, but they were not considered property by the law. Minors were not considered property by the law. You kill a kid, you go to jail for murder. Why? You killed a person. Even the South knew this. Even the South had laws against killing a slave. Why? Because it's a person. All right. This is a very long, we've still got 5 pages to go just in this one. So I'm going to cut it off here, and we will pick up again on Monday with the Dred Scott decision. So we're about halfway through the Dred Scott decision. And so I will see you guys back on Monday. Don't forget, Patriot's History of Globalism is now out. We have great offers at Wild World of History, combining globalism and Patriot's History. Globalism, Reagan, Dragon Slayers, Patriot's History, some others. Autographed copies of Globalism are available. So check it out. Make sure you get your copy right away. I know times are tough, but this is a great investment, and it's going to give you hope. You won't walk around going, oh, it's so hopeless. The globalists are going to win. No, this will give you hope. Okay, I'll see you guys back here on Monday.